What is it about this poem that has caused such controversy?
Yeah, well, it's basically the fact that it discusses women in a way which is, for some people might be described as offensive, but there are a lot of offensive things in classical literature. I remember in the Iliad, there's a lot of killing, for example, but you're not going to warn people that in an epic poem about war, some people get cheated, deceived, killed, and all sorts of other things. This is part of literature. It is a broad description of the reality of every aspect of life. Not every aspect of life is good. A lot of it is bad. A lot of it is suffering. A lot of it is cruelty. And any literature that doesn't accurately represent all of those things is no literature worth reading. I mean, as John Henry Newman said, if you created a perfect form of literature in which everyone was good and kind and wonderful to each other, it would be a very fine thing, but it wouldn't be literature. It would be something else entirely.
So some of the details of this poem, it talks about how the Greek god Zeus created 10 types of women, and that each type of woman is represented by an animal or an element, such as pig, fox, dog, donkey, ferret, monkey, and that these have negative connotations. Apparently the only type of woman who is considered to make a good wife is a bee. I don't know what any of this means, but it does sound quite antediluvian. I mean, isn't it fair enough to sort of say to the students, look, this stuff is out of date, it might be offensive, it might be upsetting? I mean, what's so wrong with making that clear?
Well, I think it sounds more pro-bee than anti-women by the sounds of it. It's more offensive to the other animals mentioned, if anything. But no, I don't think it is worth giving people content warnings or telling them that they should avoid reading something if it might be something offensive to them. I think they should read it, take it as it comes, and learn to deal with difficult ideas as they read them. That's the whole purpose of study and academia, is that you read something without having it contextualized beforehand, because it's a slippery slope. When this begins, it starts with, oh, this might be offensive, but before you know it, the next thing is it's contextualizing any text at all and telling people how to take it before they read it. People should be able to form their own conclusions from the study of the text through intelligent thought, not be told what conclusions to reach before doing the study. You wouldn't do it in mathematics. You wouldn't say, here's a long equation, and by the way, here's the answer that we've given you beforehand. You say, here's the way of thinking about things. Now take this equation and work it out for yourself, because in the process of doing that, you learn how to think.
You see, what I don't understand about this is if I were a young person choosing to take the study of classics, I would probably be aware. I mean, if you read Ovid's Metamorphoses, it's a litany of sexual violence and other forms of violence. It's Adonis's mother had sexual intercourse with her father in order to produce Adonis, and then he was born from a tree. I mean, that's a dysfunctional family, isn't it? Why? Surely, if knowing what we know about the classics, you just wouldn't take that course, would you?
No, it's amazing that people who were being written about 4,000, 3,000 or 2,000 years ago don't conform to the woke standards of today. It's shocking that none of them are up to the minute with all of this agenda. It really is. They should all be cancelled. Every single Greek god was a pervert and a villain and a murderer by the sounds of it, apart from, one or two of them. And even the really good ones by today's standards would be regarded as being evil in some way. So we just have to cancel every single figure from literature, or write long, lengthy essays about how they need to be read, which need to be read before you read the actual reading. And then in about 50 years, all of those content warnings will also fall foul of the modern standards, because things will move on beyond that. And those content warnings will need content warnings of their own. And then before you know it, to read the Iliad, you'll need to read 7,000 content warnings before you even get onto the actual text. If you just train people how to think, they can read it for themselves. And if people just exercised intelligent thought and didn't get offended by things so easily, but actually read it in the context that it was written, then I think we'd all be better off.
I mean, you say that with some levity, but a couple of years ago there was a feminist website that had a definition for trigger warning, and they applied a trigger warning to the definition of trigger warning because the word trigger has connotations of guns. And we've even seen that at the University of Glasgow, I think, a few months ago. They said that they weren't going to use the phrase trigger warning anymore. They were going to use content warning because it might remind them of, I don't know, Boys in the Hood or so, I don't know, something that makes them upset. But this is an odd thing. Isn't there something quite paternalistic and patronising ultimately about this? Because we're dealing with adults, aren't we? And I get that if you've got a text that has some unpleasant elements and you're teaching young children, you want to be a bit careful about that and you want to make people aware. But these are adults, aren't they? Or does this say something about the general infantilism of the modern world?
I think what it shows is the way that education has changed. It used to be about teaching people how to think. Now it's about teaching them what to think. And when education becomes about teaching people what to think instead of how to think, it's not education, it's indoctrination. I think that marks the shift from an education system which was about making people strong thinkers able to take on the world, and now turning them into people who are in line with a certain agenda. And I think that is the shift that we're seeing here.